Welcome to the Tech Savvy Professor podcast, which features two faculty members who love tech and love making it part of their work. I'm Marty at Kent State University.
And I'm Eric Perry, faculty at Kaiser University.
Well, Eric, this is a topic, we bantered around a few topics from a list that I'd put up, and you said, I think this would be one that we should talk about. And I agree with you. It's one of the topics that I know nothing about. I've had no experience dealing with it from an academic standpoint, but I know you have. So relying heavily on your information and what you have to share, and I'll just try and do color commentary along the way. We're going to talk about plagiarism and plagiarism checkers. And that goes all into the whole aspect of AI too. So what's your take on it? How have you seen it develop over the years? And how are universities using it?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things to talk about first, right? Is that there's ways that this can be done from a faculty perspective. A lot of times you're going to have a plagiarism tool that's integrated within the learning management system you use, which is like Blackboard, Canvas, Desire to Learn, Brightspace, whichever one it is that you use. That's most often what you're going to see. So the LMS is really the first place we see those. There are some free tools and options out there that students and faculty can use, but there's some considerations around that I want to talk a little bit about. And now AI has added kind of another level complexity and difficulty when we talk about plagiarism checks. So I'll start just by talking about what you're going to see most often in your learning management system. So the most popular tools right now are SafeAssign, and that's the one you see most often in Blackboard. Turnitin, you're going to see in D2L and Canvas a lot. Copy leaks. Canvas also has its own native tool and another tool called Plagiarism Check. These are add-on tools. They don't generally come with your package for your learning management system. You have to add them in, which means a subscription cost. And like a lot of these things, the more accounts you have, the cheaper the accounts, but the higher the cost. So, they sell in bulk. Primarily what it's going to look through is your the submission history that it has a database of, and then it's going to keep track of the papers that are submitted through your institution and check new student submissions against those. That's kind of the basic way it functions and operates.
So it's only checking within its own database of what it's gotten. So if I ask them to write a paper on cognitive behavioral therapy, it will check papers that it's received in its database, but not the whole universe of cognitive behavioral stuff.
Now,
am I right with
kind of that's kind of the other side of it. So the student plagiarism part it'll look at, and then it's going to look at the research database that it has access to see if there's direct quoted kind of copy paste things that come out of articles and published public domain kind of stuff. So when you get your breakdown of that plagiarism report, it'll tell you where it thinks it came from, either another student's paper, something published on the internet, or a research article, something that's been published in a journal or textbook or something like that. So it does use all three. But when it comes to student kind of sharing and cheating, that's what you're going to see. You're going to see the sources populate. And they have different ways of showing you this in the paper. They'll highlight and allow you to click on different areas of the paper where it notices that there's a high similarity between a source that it has access to and the paper that was submitted. And you're going to have your own plagiarism policy at your institution for how you handle that, how you address those sorts of things. I think the biggest piece of advice that I can give is that these things are not 100% accurate, not even close. And if you're asking for something specific, a specific detail or information, define this term or whatever, I think that's a really good opportunity to have students learn how to direct quote properly and use proper APA citation and learn when it's appropriate to direct quote. It's not always intentional plagiarism. There's some leeway to take a look at this, but I've had some really great conversations with students who really were trying to, answer the question well, would even put an in-text citation in, but didn't put quotation marks, didn't put a page number, didn't do the things that would indicate it was a direct quote. But you could see that there was some effort made to show that it came from somewhere else. Those are good conversations to have for them to be able to learn. And you can't lean just into that plagiarism check, especially when we're talking about AI. plagiarism tools will tell you that there's when it comes to texts, the kind of the original plagiarism check, they can get almost 98, 99% accuracy. And they publish that. And I would buy into that. Claims of accuracy on detecting AI use in papers, though, widely vary. Usually you'll see claims between 20% and 80% is their success rate. And the high rate of false positives can be somewhere between 70 and 90%. And these are the claims that tools themselves are putting out.
So let me slow you down a little bit. I have, our institution uses Canvas.
Mm-hmm.
One of the tabs that I can add in is a Turnitin, tab that's in Canvas. Does that mean I have the resource to use, or is that just a tab? Does an institution have to buy that, or does it come generally as part of the whole package?
Usually it's an add-on.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's something that's there, but if you try to use it and your IT team has it turned on in the shell, it'll just tell you don't have access.
Yeah. So my second question of what you've covered so far is the purpose for doing all of this plagiarism check. Does it seem like, considering the tools, considering how people use information these days, originally written material properly cited is a thing of the past?
I don't know. I can see the argument, right? I get it. It's kind of like, we were told when we were younger, like, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket. And now I have a calculator on my phone at any point in time.
Yeah.
Those skills are still useful. They have a purpose. And I think there's still something to be said for ensuring that you're presenting what's yours as yours. And maybe I don't know, maybe I'm a little more strict about that, having seen my own presentations presented by someone else, told that story on here before. I think there still is relevance to it. And I think there's skill to be had and to be developed out of learning how to properly give credit, and it's interesting when I really want to hear a student's voice in the paper. Like, I don't want you to just define what I asked you for. I want you to explain to me your understanding of a concept. When that comes out of somewhere else, it doesn't tell me anything about whether or not they understand it. They're just copying, pasting information. And if my purpose in grading that and reading that is to assess their learning, I need it in their own voice and their own words. So I think there's reason to check for it, but it isn't just a gotcha. It isn't just to have to get after you. There are teachable moments there. And what I like about some of the plagiarism policies that universities have had that I've worked with, when they allow faculty that you don't just report it, you don't just say, hey, this is academic dishonesty. They give you the opportunity to talk to the student, to work through it, which for me, I feel like 99 times out of 100 is a much more valuable experience. And it's not always this plagiarism. I mean, there's clear indications as you start to review and use these tools more of when they really have just pulled something out of, they purchased the paper online.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, it'll come back like a copy. You can go Google it and find it.
And that's been my primary source of since I don't have paid access to these types of plagiarism checkers. The amount of stuff that you can find just by copying a section out of the person's paper, putting it in Google and go search and see what comes up is amazing.
But there are free and cheap options for students and faculty, and I wanted to mention a couple of those.
Okay.
Grammarly is great.
Yeah.
So it's one that's used all the time. EasyBib is another one that some people may be familiar with. Scriber has a plagiarism check tool. Papers Owl and QText are two that I've seen used before. I haven't used those myself, but I have used the others. And they're pretty low cost, worth the investment. And what I like about particularly Grammarly and EasyBib is that it'll give you a heads up on some of the citation errors that you have in there when it finds those direct quotes. And it takes 2 seconds to fix. But direct quotes are not the enemy. And I've heard a lot of faculty talk about, I don't, this all needs to be in your own voice, supported by in-text citations. Well, there's things you can't do that with. If I want students talking about statistics they find in research studies, for example, they have to direct quote that. It's not their stuff, So, I mean, there's reasons and purpose to that. I got a student paper the other day that quoted something that Rogers said that really fit well in there in one of his kind of earliest works. And I thought that's a really great example of something that you can't say another way, that comes directly from the source, the person that you're talking about. There are some AI capture tools, right? So things like Grammarly and EasyBib, they're going to look for AI, but there are tools out there that are specifically designed to look for whether or not a paper has used AI. And, that's the cautionary tale I want to throw out, because there is no service right now that has been shown researched as efficacious, that does not have a high rate of false positives.
Yeah.
Came across a really interesting study of a group of faculty who went out and tested these and found nearly half of them were ineffective.
Yeah.
So
and often, if you change, all you have to do, I'm not trying to enforce deceit, but I'm trying to make a point. With what you get back from AI, all you have to do is change around a little sentence structure, add in a few of your own well-placed thoughts and opinions about things, and it lowers the threshold of them finding it as a AI generated context. And frankly, some of the stuff that I generate with AI, it's like, this sounds like an English butler. It doesn't sound like Marty Gensius. So I have to do that anyways.
Right. It could be a little overly formal, right?
Yeah, a little flowery for Dr. J.
Yeah, and I think I heard somebody say it better, but the gist of it is that these tools are for really lazy cheaters. They're going to catch the people who just copy paste and don't put any effort into cheating. So that's important to keep in mind too. But if you want to try out and see whether or not something, if you have a feeling it's AI generated, you could try things like Quillbot, Merlin, and Winston AIs. ChatGPT will look for you. GPT Radar, GPT-0, and there's an AI Detector Pro. All of those, I believe, are paid services, except for you can use your base level kind of subscriptions for a few of those for a couple of tries. But I wanted to warn about the research. It's just not there. It doesn't have the capability to determine what parts and pieces are not AI generated. I did see something really interesting, and I don't know if this is something that's actually going to happen, but they're trying to find a way to meta tag the text that comes out of so that you can't pull that tag out when you copy paste. It was an idea that I saw that, there would always be this kind of associated tag with that line of text.
Unless you switch it to plain text and strip it down that way.
Right. There's always ways around it, right?
That's what I mean. It's a 3-card Monte game. You always think, the plagiarism checkers and the AI checkers always think they have the result, and then the card shows up in a different pile or in a different, in a different stack, because people figure out ways to work around it.
So it's like the job applications now. What advice I got, I was listening to a podcast about career counseling. Somebody sent me. They're like, "Hey, career nerd, listen to this," and I did. And the advice that was given was to copy and paste the job posting into the person's CV or resume and change the font to white, so that when they submit it, the HR software that looks through that still sees the text, but the recruiter doesn't. So it pops up with a high percentage match of keywords or in that resume. And I thought, that's genius and super deceptive, right? But it is pretty genius. There's always a way to work the system, like these HR softwares that are looking to sort resumes for recruiters. So people are always looking for the workaround.
Not to be too super philosophical here. You've given some good tools. You've given some good things that people can use if they choose to go down that path. We've talked previously on shows about AI and how to incorporate in your syllabus ways to explain the permissions or boundaries that you have around the use of AI in student papers, projects, things that they develop, and how you can include those in your syllabi. Are we fighting a battle with this that generationally is not going to be successful? If you think of learners today, they come into the classroom, they want to know, okay, all this extra stuff is fine, but really, what do I have to do? And I think that's where I'm wondering around teaching writing, if you want to call it that, and avoiding plagiarism. If we can teach them the rules and the thought process of what they should be considering when they're looking at other people's content and when they're generating their own, and not get into that gotcha battle with them, because ultimately that paper on cognitive behavioral therapy doesn't mean that much to them. How to do it and what they should do means that much to them.
I'll go maybe even a little more extreme, because I think this is eventually going to take us to a place where assessment can't happen in writing like this anymore. Assessment has to happen. It has to return to a place where, we have the student expressing verbally on tests, on timed activities, in controlled circumstances, their knowledge and understanding and conceptualization of topics that they've learned. For a long time, we've been leaning into this idea that the paper is the way, that they express this, that they integrate research and things like that. But it may not be the way we can assess anymore, because there's too many ways to have that done that don't give you an idea of whether or not they've actually mastered the content. So I think we're actually going to return to earlier ways of assessment, maybe with a technological bent. I just took my assessment for the board certified telemental health provider credential. And I did that one online, right? And I had to show my desk and take the camera around the room and make sure the place was quiet. I had to leave the camera and the sound on the whole time. And somebody came on and asked me what the stuff was on my desk. I had a PlayStation controller in the corner. They made me move because I might cheat with the PlayStation.
Did they look for the writing on the palms of your hand? I mean, that was the way we used to do it.
There's ways in which now we're kind of moving, I think, essentially back to the ways that we've assessed learning previously, because technology gives us ways that we don't need to leverage anymore. It was just like my kids have learned a lot of math with a calculator, whereas I learned a lot of math by hand. But I don't disagree with that. The technology is here for them to do that. I want them to have a baser understanding of the math, but I want them to lean into the tools too.
Yeah, I can hear, if you listen carefully in the background, you can hear the sound of thousands of rhetoric departments screaming. Because whenever they have plagiarism or when they have AI workshops at my university, I'll go on to see them because I want to see what the university has to say about AI. And it's English and rhetoric instructors that are just screaming to high heaven about producing content. We think differently about that these days. I think the generation thinks differently about that in terms of, if the tools are there, then use it, versus content generation. I think we have to be careful to teach them to attribute appropriately when you're using someone else's content, but to play the gotcha game and my brain is better than AI's game that people get into, I think, is kind of self-destructive. It's a Sisyphean task. You're never going to be able to successfully get there. So yeah, it's forcing thinking on how we assess differently and what is really meaningful assessment in terms of our educational system. I've said this maybe before on this. I've said it to students that I don't know any student who goes to their first clinical counseling position as a master's student, and their boss asks them to write an APA 7th edition style term paper. Now, if you want to go on and get a doctorate where we still play that game, then that's probably an important skill to be able to have in terms of producing content and research at the doctoral level. But there's not a lot of practice. They need to know, what they need to know? They need to know how to write good letters, because that's what clinicians do more of than anything else. So, and we don't teach our students how to do that. So
no, and I've noticed working with clients again, having more clients. I write a lot of letters, and I feel like I'm pretty good at it, but I don't think I ever had any training in it.
I think my training came from just experience. I got better and better with it. Frankly, AI helps a lot with that if it doesn't make you sound like an English butler, but it can throw together a pretty good letter for you to adjust. And sometimes, I'll do that. I'll say, here are the points I want in the letter. These are the things I want to highlight, and it'll generate a letter for me. And I'll say, okay, don't make me sound so smug. Make it sound more familiar, or make it be more concrete. Don't be so loquacious with your language, and it'll regenerate one that comes even closer. So
don't sound loquacious must confuse it a little.
It's kind of fun to have most of our devices, heads will explode if we ask them the right stuff too many times in the wrong way. So, any other suggestions from your experience?
That's it. I mean, do your research. and be careful with the research that you find. That would be my biggest thing. I think as a faculty, understand why you're doing it, how it's helpful, and what it does for the student's development. Like I said, those conversations that these things have created have been much more beneficial than finding a 99% match. So that's just been my experience.
Yeah, I to me, it's kind of what you're suggesting is old school's coming back again, because I've never left old school in a way with my examinations and assessments. I don't do a lot of papers. I don't want to read them, and I don't want to force students to generate them. I'd rather do projects, and I still do exams. And the exams, even with online courses, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to come to campus this one night, twice a semester, to take a midterm and a final exam with no notes, sitting at a desk and have at it. So, some of that is going to come back, probably even more. I'd like you to come in this night and demonstrate this technique that you've read about, you've learned about, you've seen video of. Now it's your turn to show that you have that skill set. Is probably what you're suggesting, a better form of assessment than just facts and content, more application kinds of things. Well, that's it. I think a wrap for this episode. You can email us at the podtalknetwork@gmail.com, and we'll take your question into the podcast and try and get an answer for you. Look for us on Spotify, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, and all different podcast servers. Our bumper music is from Philip Gross, Rast, from the Free Music Archive. Everything you need to know, you can find out about this podcast, including a direction to the website, which is techsavvyprofessor.net, from thepodtalk.net. It will also include other shows like Circular Firing Squad and a new show that I'm doing on spatial computing called Vision Profiles. That's it for this episode. Thanks for subscribing to the Tech Savvy Professor.